Alan.
All right, and we are live after a lot of shenanigans backstage. We are here to discuss a Shadow in Summer, I believe. Shadow in Summer, yes. I've got these bind-ups where the names are always different. But yeah, anyway, I am joined by some amazing people, some that I've been looking up to all year, and some I talk to pretty much every day. So we've got my good friend Sarah from Sarah Reads here. We've got the amazing Dr. Fantasy, or Philip Chase. We've got my good friend and booktube brother, Nico from Nico's Book Reviews, and the Long Price Prophet, or as he is known by his on-dot name, removing the parts that are boring, Alan from the Library of Alexandria. You're muted, Alan.
You're muted.
This is my pose of greeting.
So, guys, why don't you go ahead, even though I've announced your channels, go ahead and tell everybody what your channels are about. I'm sure some of you don't need an introduction, but do it anyway.
Do you want us to go in the same order?
Yes, yeah? Absolutely.
All right, I'm Sarah. My channel is Sarah Reads. Thank you for inviting me, Andrew. I feel like we have done a couple of these together at this point, but I'm excited to discuss this book. I feel like this is a good one to talk about.
Super. I guess I'm next then. So first of all, thank you, Andrew, for hosting this. I'm excited to be in my first chat with you. So this is fantastic. And I think you proposed this thing way back, months ago, when I think we were both sort of interested in reading Long Price Quartet because of Alan removing the parts that are boring, otherwise known as the Long Price Prophet. So yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to finally be here, to get that chance to talk with you. I've had discussions with Sarah before, and she is absolutely awesome. I've had Alan, I think I might have had, outside of AP, I think you're probably the person I've had the most collabs with.
So, it pleases me.
Yeah, so awesome. And Nico, it is really a pleasure to finally get to meet you as well. I'm really excited for this.
I think you've replied to some of my comments on your videos before, but that's about it.
Comment replier on Book Review.
Yeah, I think this kind of came together. I think it was like my 300 to 500 sub live show or something like that. Yeah. And you popped into the comment section. You're like, oh, you want to read LPQ? And I was just like, okay, Philip Chase agreed to talk to me. Check. So we're gonna make that happen.
Look, Andrew, Philip lends legitimacy to anything that you do. So if you are a dictator trying to take it over, you just need Philip on your channel because he lends credibility to what you're doing.
Perfect. So just because I'm curious, what copy did everybody get?
I have the omnibus edition.
I have the same one.
Oh, Alan ran away. I've got two.
It's difficult to find other editions of it, I think, at this point, right?
Yeah, it is.
So I got really lucky, and I decided I was just going to buy this because I had one of the other ones that only came with two of them, and I couldn't find the matching one. So I went and bought this just before Alan caused them to be out of print.
I bought this for $16 last year.
Oh my god!
I was gonna say I paid maybe $20 for mine.
No one had ever heard of it.
Yeah, well,
right
it's like you can't find this one anymore. So
I did a mad rush on the hardbacks right after I finished the series because I knew that these were a series that I wanted the actual books for. Because I love this cover artist. I love the cover art for this book. I don't know if you guys have any It's just.
Yeah,
it's all
the
very
same art as the omnibus edition.
But yeah, okay, it's the same art as that. But you guys don't have the betrayal. It doesn't have the Betrayal in Winter cover art.
No,
correct.
But I love this cover artist, and so I was like, I want to get these. So I have both, but I can't believe that they don't. I heard that Abraham had difficulty with his publisher. They were mad at him because they didn't sell enough, but then they didn't promote it, so they never released Price of Spring in paperback. It only exists in hardback, Price of Spring, but the other three are in paperback. And I think that's why they don't release the omnibus anymore, and certainly I think that's why he doesn't ever talk about. I never hear him talk about this series on social media ever, and it makes me sad because it's so good, y'all. If y'all like this book, man, I'm so excited.
I actually went on Book Depository and got the UK Orbit editions.
Nice.
Mainly because my sizes in this one don't match. Pages started falling out randomly, and the ink is light reflective.
They are bound very tightly. I don't like that. I like a little more flop.
This one is not to rub it in, but very nice to read. It's that's pretty good.
That is
Derry
nice.
says, all praise the LPQ prophet.
It is. I mean, Alan is probably the reason we're all here. So
Yeah.
talking about the Long Price Quartet anyway. So
Well,
Definitely.
It was funny. I was watching Chatting with Nuts last week, I believe it was, where Alan was just like, I love LPQ, but I'm also starting to not like it because everybody else is reading it.
Oh,
No, I like it. I'm just like, I'm starting to be like, man, why is everyone reading this now?
because of you.
No, I know, but
it's
now
your
I'm like,
fault.
but now I'm like, it's mainstream. I got to go get my turtleneck and skin.
So what was everybody's general thoughts on the book? Just general liked it, didn't like it, loved it.
Andrew, I did not get to introduce myself.
Oh, well,
I didn't
Nico
either. I
did
was-
either. Yeah, Nico needs to introduce
Neither
himself.
did Nico, Andrew.
then I am jumping the gun, and I'm being a poor host. Please
We got
proceed.
distracted talking about printings. It was fine.
Strike one.
Well, I'm Nico. My channel is Nico's Book Reviews. I talk about fantasy. I already talked about my book and everything, but yeah, I had been wanting to read this for a long time. And so then Andrew sends me a message a while back and said, hey, do you want to join in a buddy read that includes Philip Chase? And I'm like, yeah, okay. So, and then we got Alan to come and Sarah and everyone. So it's a nice group, and it's a good excuse to make me read this because it's been on my list for a long time. So since Alan mentioned it anyway.
So I when I first started BookTube, went and looked for like a bunch of military fantasy. Like I went and through Goodreads and I went through a thing and just add. And I saw it possible it's Petrick's review, but I saw someone say something about the third book, about how that it was just like it was I don't know. I heard that later on in these books, it's like nothing they'd ever seen. And I'm like, that sounds really interesting. And so I'll read that. And I read the first two, and then I took like a 5-month break. And then I read the next two at the beginning of this year, and it is absolutely correct. Like this series, when I completed it, I have not to this day read a series like it. Like I haven't. It is unlike anything else I've ever read, taken in holistically. And so but when I read it, I was like, knowing the kind of things that Philip likes in books, and Sarah especially, like you two especially, I was like, Sarah and Philip are gonna like this book. And then I was so happy when Nico and Andrew liked it also, because I was like, less sure there. I would have been shocked if Philip didn't like it. I'm like, no, this is right up Philip's alley. Nothing happens, like nothing happens. So, but yeah, it's like it makes me happy. Like it makes me happy. Like this is, I don't like anything that anybody else likes. Like it makes me sad. Like I haven't read Abercrombie or Stormlight and Wheel of Time or Dune or really anything that anybody reads. I only read crap nobody reads. So it does make me happy when people are reading something that's that I just was like, oh my gosh, like this is like literally being slept on. Like this is a series that is being slept on. So it just makes me really happy that people are reading it. Not everybody's liked it that's tried it, but it's not for everyone. No books for everyone. So so yeah, it's exciting to be here, and I can't wait to watch the progression of this, because every subsequent book just informed what happened before, and I'm like, oh, all right. He planned this whole quartet from page one. Like as you go, you're going to know that everything was planned. This was not a case of like, well, I have a sequel, so what am I going to write? No. All 4 books were planned out, and I think he does that as a writer. So I think that's why his book ones, because Dagger and Coin is like this. Book ones are really slow because he's laying a ton of groundwork that is going to come back later. Also, real quick, Andrew, there is a slight feedback coming from one of us, and I don't know who it is. I just hear an echo. Do y'all hear the echo?
A slight one.
So let's see if we can fix it if we can.
I can switch mine. I don't know if it's me. I wasn't hearing anything, but I'm not using a headset like I normally do. So let me try to switch.
Also, Alan, while we have this pause, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm Alan. My channel is the Library of Alexandria. You can't find it searching for that. So either search for the Library of Alan or just Alexandria, and you'll find it. YouTube thinks that you mean the Library of Alexandria, which pleases me when people. I hear people on BookTube try to say Alexandria now, the Library of Alexandria. Doesn't work. They don't. They slip and they say Alexandria. I do it. I just talked about Caesar burning down the library, and I said the Library of Alexandria, and I would hope Caesar does not burn down my channel. But
Every time I play Seven Wonders now.
yes, yes.
Who's Alexandria today?
Yes, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, exactly.
All right. Well, now that we've got introductions out of the way, and I've let's kind of go back to general thoughts, just general ratings and things of that nature. Because frankly, I loved it. I ended up giving it around a 4.5. If we're going to do a star rating system, I know not everybody likes those, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, even though nothing really happens.
Yeah. Phillips declared a holy war on star ratings just recently.
Well, and that's kind of why I added the little caveat.
Yeah. He's great. He's like literally started a crusade. He's like about to invade us, Andrew. We got to watch out.
You know what?
Well,
It's like
he's coming
I'm
for the
hearing
trumpets.
things like Philip says that people who give stars are actually Satan worshipers.
That's what I heard. I actually heard.
Right? Yeah. That's what I'm hearing now because I made a video explaining why I don't give stars, but stars are fine. I'm actually cool with stars, everyone.
As long as they stay in the sky where they belong and not on a book review.
Oh my God. Sarah's the captain of the Templars.
That was a great line. Wow.
Nico, do you give stars?
I usually don't in my actual video reviews, but I'll star it on like Goodreads or Discord. But yeah, sometimes I'll say what it is if like my review is kind of wishy-washy, and I'll say like, okay, I liked these things, I really didn't like these. And I'm like, so this probably comes out to, sometimes, but I don't regularly do it, I guess.
Yeah.
I just kind of let you decide what your opinion is based on what I've said.
Gotcha.
So, well, anyway, I don't give stars, but I'll talk about my general impressions here and just a couple things that I think Abraham does really well. This is a really talented writer. So thank you, Alan, for getting me to read this. He's does a lot of things really, really well. I think what I'd like to focus on here is the fact that he does not just characters, but specifically, I think what he does really well with characters is relationships between characters.
Yes.
And in that regard, what you have, without spoilers here, but I want to talk about it later when we do spoilers, but you have a lot of relationships between two characters that are really complex, that have a lot of nuance, that feel very real. You have characters who feel conflicted about that other person. And it's just something very psychologically three-dimensional about that I really love. So it's the relationships that really sold me on this particular book, A Shadow in Summer. And I think that's a lot of what he's doing there. I think what Alan said makes sense, that he's building, right? He's building these characters, these relationships, and the world, because I also loved the world building in here with the various different cultures interacting and the sort of high context versus low context culture, which is what I talked about a little bit in my review. And Andrew and I had a little exchange about that. Yes. But yeah, I love the relationships between the characters because they're so complex, and he captures just how you can feel ambiguously about someone. You could be in love with someone, but you could also not trust that person.
Yeah.
You could feel that you are very close to someone, but be afraid of that person in moments. Yeah. You could, there's just so many layers to a relationship. And Abraham, I think, is a master at capturing that reality of human relationships and psychology. So that's the thing that stuck out the most to me.
Philip, you hit it on that is what I love about this whole series is there is a plot at large, but it is there to service the relationships between these characters that more added and stuff is delved into, and it's so good. These characters feel so real, and they make decisions that I am yelling. I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? But I understand why they're doing that, because they're people who make, and we make bad decisions as people, even though, it's not the right thing to do, but I completely understand why they make the decision. It's just like, guys, they feel so human to me. And I love that about this book. And I also love the setting, the Asian inspired setting, and really, going after the economy, like, trying to bring down a nation through its economy is just super interesting rather than militarily, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, I've talked plenty about these books. I'd rather hear what you guys say.
What about you, Nico?
So yeah, I really liked it with the first book. It started out, I just kind of wasn't sure what I was reading for a little bit. It does, start and remains fairly slow, but I was interested right away. And just kind of the setting of like the very start, where it kind of sets up the character who um I was trying to think of a way to not say it spoilery, but just the early part, looking at that, and then kind of the jump to the main story, set it up really interesting. I feel like all like the poses and everything, at first I'm like, that's really strange, but then it just kind of became part of the world, and just a lot of what he did here. And I agree, the characters are great. You guys kind of covered that, so I thought I'd talk about some other stuff. But just like, yeah, the setting I thought worked well, and the amount of world building that was done just through what the characters were doing, how they were thinking, how they were looking at things, uh, what like the power structure was, the way they do poses, the way different people look at, okay, and like if the poses were so specific, because it's like, oh, this is a pose of thanks to somebody who's not, a family member, but is slightly above you in social, and I'm like they got really detailed, and so it kind of showed how everything was working with that as well, and so did a lot for not a very long book. And there may not be a ton of plot, but I think if you're going to do a book that is doing a really good job but not having a ton happen, yeah, making it really long probably wouldn't be as good. So I think this was the kind of perfect length too.
The entire series is slightly longer than like Words of Radiance or Oathbringer. Like the entire series is slightly longer than a Stormlight book.
All right. Well, I agree with everything that everybody has said. I think one thing I knew I was going to like it anyway because of everything that Alan had said. So I feel like going in, I already had that internal bias where I was like, this is a book you are going to like. So however it starts, if you feel a little bit confused, it's okay, because clearly it's going to all coalesce and become a book that you enjoy. But one thing I really did like is when you read the first chapter of this book, you, as a fantasy reader, think, okay, I know this setup. We're now going to follow a specific type of hero journey. And then like the second or third chapter comes and you're like, no, this is not at all what you are going to follow. This is going to take you in a completely different direction than you expect it to take you. And that's great, because I think I would have liked that traditional story that I felt was coming from the setup, but I liked this one even more. I think what Abraham does with it is very different than what you will find in most fantasy, in terms of setup, in terms of character, in terms of how the plot plays out. And I'm just expecting to become more and more invested and enjoy it even more the further along in the series I go.
Yeah. And he continues to do that. I'm like, I know where this is headed. Wait, what? What? No!
Well, that just makes me more excited to read.
Have you started winter yet? It's December. Have you started winter yet?
I am
start
waiting
after
to finish
today.
a review copy that I have
Word
in order to start that.
I gotcha. And no one mentioned the Ondot. I love the magic system in this. The freaking like abstract concepts given human form. Saraket is this economic giant because it has an advantage on the cotton trade, which, hold on, guys, don't all rush the Amazon button like at once to read a book about the cotton trade. But man, the fact that like it's this concept of removing the part that continues, which is the seed. And, they have this thing called Seedless. I mean, that's what they call him, that can snap his fingers and whoop, all of the seeds of the cotton just whoop, fall out. Like, so the Kayate, they don't need technology, because instead they have these uber powerful, little mini gods that can do these incredible things. But they do it by training these poets, which are the wizards, through binding grammar, and they bind this abstract concept, and anyway, we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. But it's just the ondot are just so interesting.
Before we get further into the ondot, there is something that both Philip and Nico said that I found. The people who don't like the series, it's like a sticking point for them, and it kind of like itches at their brain, and it's the gestures.
Poses.
And in Philip's review, I dropped into his comment section, and I didn't have any issues of it, but it's because I have a background in the deaf community. Yeah. My grandparents are deaf. My mom worked for a deaf school for 30 years. And so I grew up around American Sign Language. And so to me, it was just natural. I never struggled with that because it's gestures, intensity, speed, facial tics, everything kind of goes into that. And I was just kind of wanted to get your takes on like how the gestures, did it bother you? Did it work for you? Did it enrich the story, or did it just pick at your brain?
For me, it was fine. In college, like I studied, like my minor was in Japanese, and Japanese is like it's a very context-based language. There's no plural. There's no plural in Japanese. There's no future tense. Like it's all implied. It's all, if you're talking to multiple people, they know that you're talking to them. You know what I mean? If you're talking about something that you're going to do in the future, you either use the word tomorrow, or it's just implied. Like everyone there knows that you're talking about the future. They don't need, the future or the plural. And so I was accustomed to that. When I teach Latin, my students don't understand they don't understand not having personal pronouns. It's like the friend or her friend. I'm like, if you're talking about this person going somewhere with a friend, you can probably infer that it's her friend. But in English, we have almost no context. Like it is a completely non-contextual language because we have words for literally everything. And so I can understand why that would be super bizarre for an English speaker, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the way I understood it, and the terms that I used that Andrew, you and I discussed a little bit was high context and low context cultures. And so just in case, for everyone, so a low context culture tends to be a culture where people will say what they mean. So they'll just use verbal language to state what they mean. And American culture, where, not Sarah, but the rest of us are American. Sarah's from up north. But American culture tends to be very low context, whereas high context culture, there's a lot more subtlety involved. So you have to pay attention to the way somebody says something. You have to pay attention to maybe body language and facial expressions when they say it. So just an example, I lived in Nepal, which is, north of India. And it's a country that tends to be much more high context than the United States. So it resulted in some interesting things because I'm coming from a low context culture where I'm not as in tune with the nonverbal signals as people over there. So I came at it thinking, okay, people say what they mean, right? So if I'm at somebody's house in Nepal and I'm invited over for dinner, and I've eaten my first course and I'm full, and they say, would you like some more? I will say no, and then they'll put food on my plate because they didn't see the really, the no in my face, or I didn't use my hands to cover the plate in order to really convey that I mean no. So the host, being a gracious person, will give me more food. And then I was like, wait, I said no. So, and I grew up thinking you have to eat all the food on your plate. That's how I was raised. So I would eat all the food and they'd be okay. Oh, you want some more? And I'd be, no, I'm full. Boom, more food, So I would get into situations there early on where I was leaving these people's homes very, very full. So, and of course the reverse can happen. I know a good friend from Nepal who came here to the States and was at an American household, and they asked him, would you like more food? And he said, oh, no, it's okay. And they said, okay. And they put the food away. And he thought he was signaling by just saying, no, I'm full, being polite, that would be a signal to the host to give him more food. So the American doesn't pick up on that signal though. So this culture that we have portrayed in here, the Kayam, these city states and of the Kayam, very high context culture where not only do you have the verbal message, but you have sometimes you have body language or poses or signals that can even contradict what's being said. So you have to pay attention to those subtleties, and there are these layers and layers of signals going on, and it's very rich. I found it to be very, very rich and interesting, and I don't think it's something you could put in a film or a screen version, because you'd have to explain every single gesture, right? Oh, I see that you are doing I'm not too serious about this pose right now. It would be a difficult thing. The audience would have to know. So it's interesting too with the interactions, people who come from outside this culture, who maybe know a little bit but are more clumsy communicating in these gestures and these forms and poses. It's just such a rich bit of world building. I haven't seen anything quite like it in any other series, so I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah. Philip,
I have never enjoyed a lecture more.
Philip,
that was really fascinating.
That was awesome.
It was the same in Japan. Like they don't say no, because no is way too direct. So you ask like, hey, you want to do something, and they say a little or different, like it's a little not, or it's different than what you're saying. They just won't flat out say no, and I'm just like, what? Like, I'm trying to talk like yes or no to these these teenagers that we met there, and it's just like it's exactly like you say. Like, they have a gift thing when we're giving gifts at the end to our homestay family. Yeah. It's just understood. You refuse it twice. You refuse. No, I couldn't. No, I couldn't. And then you take it on the third one.
Third time. Yep.
Exactly. You take the gift on the third one, but it's just, I would have been like, oh, thanks. Fortunately, our liaison had explained the ritual. Like, oh, thank you for the gift. And, then I offered, and they're like, they would have been like, oh, no, thanks. I'll be like, just take the freaking gift, So yeah, it was like that over in Japan too. It's really fascinating because
it's really cool. And Anita is confirming she's from India in the comments there. Yeah,
we are so much more direct here. So much more direct.
Americans, and there's a difference too. I mean, obviously, individuals within a culture can be more perceptive. Yeah. Women tend to be more perceptive than men when it comes to picking up on these nonverbal signals in general. That's a gross generalization. But then there are just some cultures that emphasize it more than others. Yeah. So, and what Daniel Abraham does is just brilliant. I mean, it's seeing this cultural phenomenon on the page, and he does a wonderful job of capturing it.
Sarah, I'd like to get your Canadian viewpoint on this.
I don't think we're that different, although I will admit that there are various groups of First Nations individuals who live in Canada, and especially in the northern part of my province. So technically Newfoundland is Newfoundland and Labrador, and there are a lot of First Nations communities there. And so we do cultural competency around working in the hospital, because there is that discrepancy between in communication and how various gestures or facial expressions and what they mean, and things that could be very commonplace. Like, there are things that we do in physical exams or in interviewing patients that would be considered very invasive or very inappropriate in that context. So I think in Canada, it depends on what group of people you are talking about. But I agree that Daniel Abraham here, he really makes it a unique part of his world building. It flows so well. And I think that for him, it just helps him make his characters feel even more realistic, because we get to see, and like Philip said, this book is really about the relationships, and he uses these parts of the world building. Like, I don't think that this is not just a neat hook or a throwaway that he has put in here to give his book that little bit of something extra. He utilizes this to grow the relationships, or to show how they shift or how they change, the way that people approach each other when they first meet versus, at the end of the book, you can clearly see that the relationship between two people has changed because of the way that they use these gestures and poses. And I think that that's really interesting. It's one thing to create this system, and then it's another layer to implement it as effectively as he does. So
yeah, it really did. Because I enjoyed it too, and the whole explanation, Philip, was fantastic on the actual correct terms for it and everything. But it was so specific, and it just really felt like part of the world. And although it took some getting used to, because I had never read anything like that either, it like even the small ones where you'd have a character be like, oh, I actually did this like slightly sarcastically or very, very slightly different, but this person's never even going to notice that. So it's just like, that's the extent. Like it's such a large amount of the communication, and it made a lot of the communication feel really different because, you know, characters would, you know, you can communicate whatever you want by taking the proper pose. And then so not only are you looking at what are they trying to communicate to me, but what are they actually seeming to communicate? And it added a lot. And in a series that seems like there's going to be a lot of like politics and intrigue, I think it fits super well and just will make this really even more interesting.
Yeah.
I loved everything that's been said here. I think we've kind of explored the non-spoiler stuff. So let's see if this there we go. Yeah, the banner works.
Oh, that's
Oh,
cool.
All right, so let's enter into
fancy.
spoilers because Alan's already brought up Seedless, and I kind of want to start talking characters because some really interesting characters in this series. And, you know, I kind of want to talk about my favorite first, just generally. And I believe is it now? I got confused between Andet and Amat.
Amat is the head of the. She's working for the Galts, the trading company.
I
And
loved
the
Amat.
Are the I love Amat also. I love all of them except Liat. But that's because Liat is a teenager and acts literally like a teenager. So
Liat was
I hate
Maddie's
Liat.
favorite.
I'm like, I know. That's because she's a teenager and she's literally acting exactly like I have students exactly like Liat. I'm like, what are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? I'm like, seriously, no, if you don't want to be with that person, break up with them before you get with this person. Literally, I have to say that crap all the time. I'm like, what are y'all doing? Stop.
Oh man.
Well, we're in the spoiler section, so it's good to go now. But I will say Amat is my favorite. She had the most, I think, action-packed arc, if we can use the word action-packed in terms of this book.
Someone runs in one of
Yeah.
the scenes. It's action-packed.
She
I don't
moves
know,
with a
a
bad
brick
hit.
falls at one point. That's,
Oh,
it's like the most
heavens,
action we
man.
get.
Whenever her hip started hurting, my adrenaline really started pumping.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, she had the
man.
most interesting arc, I think.
Well, I like what that in this book we have older characters like Amat and Wilson.
Marchant Wilson.
Yeah,
Marchant
Wilson.
Wilson.
And then we see, you know, Liat trying to learn, and then Mati, who and then freaking Ota.
Yeah.
So good, guys. I just want to hear what you guys have to say.
I loved that awkward sort of kind of like puppy love between Marchant that he's kind of sending at Amat, and she's just like, aren't we a little too old for this? And like he's just like, nah, like I've just been too scared to talk to you over the last 20 years. And that felt super realistic because usually in literature, it's always like the young kids who are too nervous to go tell somebody, hey, I like you. And then we find out like, oh no, this happens to everybody.
And you can kind of see, like, if I can use the phrase going native, like Wilson isn't super keen about what he's there to do.
No.
Like he likes Amat and he likes Sarah Cat, you know, like he's comfortable there. And, you know, he's, you know, when you're on the ground, like you don't really want to topple, like destroy the freaking economy of this city. It's going to bring it to ruins,
Right.
you know, and
that's one of the most compelling arcs because of that conflict. I think the inner conflict that Marchant Wilson has, because he's in love with Amat.
Yeah.
He doesn't want her to get hurt. And that made that particular thread in here very compelling to me because I think she also has feelings for him. But in the end, the conspiracy that he was sort of forced to be part of was enough for her to say, no, I'm going to defend my city and screw my personal feelings here. I'm going to bury that because I've got to do something about this. So I loved her strength of character. It really shows there. I love that these are complex people who are conflicted. She's conflicted because she likes Marchant Wilson. She's probably a bit in love with him. He's definitely in love with her, and he wanted to try to spare her. You know, he almost screwed up everything because of that. You know, but he's trying to, you know, do what he's been ordered to do by the folks back home who are really in charge, the Galt, whoever, his house or whatever. So it just, there's so many layers in this of personal relationships and conflict within the broader conflict between this sort of Cold War going on between the Galt and the city-states of the Kayam. Really cool, really well done, complex.
I never thought of it as a Cold War, but that makes a lot of sense.
100% is. And that's like, if like, that's what makes, Ota make the decision he does, is because like, if the Kayate find out that it was Galt, then like that Galt is trying to bring them down, they will bring the full power of the Ondat against an enemy nation, and millions will die. You know what I mean? Because they talk about that ancient war between the Ondats, like from, however long ago, where it, essentially destroyed. If you look at your map, you have that, the map in your book, you have that one subcontinent in the south that, no one's there because it's been destroyed by the ancient war with the Ondat.
The old empire.
Yeah, the old empire, exactly. It's at the
Wastelands.
very south.
It literally says Wastelands, right?
Yep. That's because they use the Ondat to fight, and that's not what they're for. Like, that's not what they use the Ondat for. But it is absolutely like the Ondat are the nuclear option, 100%.
Now, did anybody? Because like I remember, I think I messaged you, Alan. After I got through the prologue, and I was just like, oh yeah, Ota's gonna be this, and then like we get Itani, and I'm like, I think like before the reveal, I was like,
I didn't figure it out.
I was like, is this? And you were just like, Raffo, Raffo.
I didn't figure it out. I was like, Ota! Yay!
Well, it kind of gave it a little bit away when he started doing complex gestures that he really shouldn't know. And I was like, this dude's in hiding. Like there's something more. And then I was like, is this Ota? Because we know that once he leaves the school, he's putting himself in danger because he's not branded.
Right. I think the back cover kind of gave it away for me a little bit, where it says, "One man, Ota Machi, stands alone at the crossroads of history." So, he's in the prologue, and then if you don't read that back page, you think, oh, well, so much for Ota. But in my head, I'm thinking, wait, he's supposed to be like the central character here, right? According to the back cover. So, it made me a little suspicious there.
I just thought he was going to come back. I thought Itani was separate. I thought Ota was going to appear like halfway through the book, and it was not. It was Itani.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was too. I honestly did not. I was surprised afterward. I'm like, I really didn't see that. I'm sure there were clues, but
I'm bad at it.
I to me it was unclear at first how much time had passed since the prologue, and it's kind of discussed later. But I was thinking that a considerably longer amount of time had passed. And that it was still kind of dealing with the legacy of what had happened. I didn't realize, I'm like, oh, it's actually not been that long. So that's why I just wasn't even thinking that mindset. I also did not read any of the blurbs because I was just reading this one on faith. So I didn't check there, and I didn't really know anything about what I was getting into with it either. But I'm still surprised I didn't notice right away. I usually pick those things out. Yeah. And I 8 years, that sounds right from what I remember it actually later says, but I was thinking like much longer at the time when it was originally brought up.
What about you, Sarah?
I think one of my kids just fell off their bed. I hear a lot of like crying. I gotta go. I'll be back.
Okay. Fair enough.
That child was taking a pose of distress.
Well, hopefully the child is okay.
Yeah, in this case, I think it's a fairly low context message that's happening there. It
is.
No gestures needed to figure that out.
I've seen pictures on her Instagram. There's probably some jumping between beds with lightsabers.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah. But yeah, like I thought it was going to be different, but I like that they're young in this. And I think from the people who have not enjoyed it, I've heard that people don't like the gestures, which is a sticking point with a lot of people. And I've also said that the characters are kind of annoying. And I mean, I agree. They're teenagers, Ota's 20. And so I get that, but I think Abraham is doing a really good job of bringing in that realistic portrayal of what teenagers do. And they are so far out of their depth. Like Liat and Mati and Ota are so far out of their depth with what's going on. Like Mati's just there to train with Heshai, who Heshai is our first introduction to the way that Abraham makes incredibly tragic characters.
I was just about to say that.
Heshai,
he is such a tragic character.
Heshai, whose own self-loathing has brought into being this thing, first of all, that is enslaved. And it's so weird. It's an abstract concept. Can that be enslaved? Something that, like, are the Ondot people, really, first of all? Second, calling it into being because he, it wants his destruction. It wants nothing more than Heshai's destruction and its own freedom. And the only reason it wants that is because Heshai hates himself. And that goes into the Ondot. And, we see, and we continue to see, like the poets, the Ondot is an extension of them. And so when Heshai has deep self-loathing, it manifests in this sociopathy that is in Seedless.
Yeah. So, Alan, you know what the word poet means, right? Where it comes from?
Mm-mm.
So it's from Greek, right?
Yeah.
And it means something like a creator. So if a poet is like a creator, right? And they call the people who practice magic in this world poets.
Yeah.
Which I think is so cool, because the concept of poets and bards, in Old English, the word for a bard is a shop, right? Which means a shaper, someone who, again, kind of creates, right? So it's an ancient concept. And of course, a very common thing in fantasy is like the power of words, right? Especially ancient words in ancient languages and so on and so forth. So I love how Abraham has sort of literalized this in a way with the magical system here. He's made the poets people who actually create something real out of something abstract, right? A storyteller tells a story, and while you're hearing it, the story is alive in your mind. It's real. But in this case, they actually bring something into the world that is real, an abstraction that becomes real and can do something, significant in the world. Plus, I love how he has portrayed the relationship between the Ondot and the poet in Heshai and Seedless. I mean, this is in a way, Seedless is a version of Heshai, isn't he? He is an extension, or what he maybe would have wanted to be, right? He is an idealization of some sort, but he also contains some of Heshai's flaws. There's a kind of cynicism there, and the self-loathing, like you said. So it's a really cool thing that he's done with this. This is a very interesting, unique magical system here, I think. That
I also like that, like, the powers of the Ondot are also very abstract. Like, they use him to remove the seeds from the cotton, but his name isn't Seedless. His name is removing the part that continues. And so they have what's called, and this is like it's called the sad trade. And it was the inciting incident, as I call it in my review video. The inciting incident is just horrific, just horrific. This poor girl who has no idea what's going on, no idea what's going to happen. And the way he describes it, it was like metal hitting, like something hitting the metal pan. Like, it's just like that. Like, this horror, no long lingering description. It's just like a single sound. And this horrific act has occurred against this, mother to be's will. And
what I thought Daniel Abraham did super interesting there, though, is the sad trade happens and then it just moves on. The story just moves.
Yeah.
And like, they don't, a lot of the times an author will hyper focus on that event. And instead he goes, let's focus on the fallout.
I think the chapter ends with her screaming, right? Like,
it ends with her screaming. And then I think it's a 2-week time jump.
Yeah.
Well, and that was like halfway. And that the pacing was definitely not what I was expecting, because everything had been kind of leading up to that moment the whole time. And then you get there and like you still have half of the first book left. And I wouldn't even really say that it was falling action. I think, Andrew, the way you said it, like, now we're going to see the impact this had, how is this going to affect all of these different people? What's the fallout? What's the aftermath we're looking at? And ended up setting up all kinds of different things to happen for the second half of the book, which I thought was really interesting. So it's just the pacing was strange, but I thought it worked really well, and it was handled very differently from a lot of books, I think.
Yeah.
And Sarah, I would love, because you're the only female perspective here, I would love to get your input on the sad trade.
It was very disturbing. It is the first time that I experienced that as something that the plot hinged on. Like you see examples of that in books, and there's tons of books if you read outside of fantasy. Like there's a lot of contemporary literature that talks about the emotional impact and what happens to people who go through something like that. But reading it like this was a bizarre mix of like clinical efficiency, like Alan said, where it's just like this drop in a pan and it's like this one single horrific moment, but then also the element of the fantastic with this happening via magic. And then because Daniel Abraham writes characters so well, seeing the fallout from that, I think it was very easy to empathize with the mother who's then bent on this revenge. And it leads us to this very interesting conversation about vengeance versus revenge. And, at what point does the fallout become a greater horror than what happened to you? But to this mother who has now lost, the most important thing to her, she's like, I don't care. The most important thing was ripped away from me. Everyone should suffer. Anybody who even came close to being involved with this. And I like the way that he wrote what came after, but reading about it and that anticipatory anxiety when you know what is going to happen was horrible. Knowing that, because there was no point reading this where I thought they're going to find a way out of this. I was like, nope, this is going to happen and it's going to be awful. And yeah, it was.
It was. And Abraham does, this is what the series focuses on, is the price of things. Like these characters make choices and it's called the long price, like the ripple effects that all of these characters' choices have over the course of their lives, because there's a 15-year gap between each book. Like each book has a huge time jump, and it's just fantastic the way Abraham handles it, and it's just so good. But everyone, the decision, the sad trade decision, the price that we see, that the price that is paid there, and it has exactly the thing that, anticipatory anxiety. Oh, get ready, Sarah. The whole series is that. The whole series is like, you see what's coming. You're like, oh no.
Well, Stephen King does anticipatory anxiety, or however you say that. I'm getting tongue tied. But like his is like a single line throwaway to tell you something that's going to happen. This was like, hey, this is what we're planning, and then you've just got to read the pages as each piece clicks into place, and it just hits different.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the cost. Look at the cost of what happened, of that single thing, and it does exactly what Seedless wants it to do. It drives Hashai to the edge, which is exactly what it was, and that's so much more horrible than just stabbing him. Like setting up his assassination. Okay, we see that all the time. Go ahead, kill him. Like that's fine. We see that all the time. But driving a man insane through like something that he should have been able to prevent. You know what I mean? Like it's just something that was going to be personally traumatizing to him. It's diabolical. And even Ota strangling him with his bare hands instead of just stabbing him. It's all very, Abraham brings us very up close. He zooms the camera very far in, rather than giving us a, wide shot of this kind of stuff. And some of it's hard to read. That scene with the sad trade, the scene where Ota is actually strangling Heshai, like those are tough.
Yeah.
Well, and the relationship between Liat and Maj is very, very interesting, because there are two women in completely different places in their life. Like to Liat, this is kind of an unfortunate setback, and she's young. She doesn't know how she's going to recover from, how her career is going to handle this. And Maj is like, I just lost a child that I very much wanted, and I'm hell-bent on revenge. And seeing them interact, and because Liat goes, oh, I kind of should have seen the signs of this happening, because Maj was nothing but happy.
Mhm.
And she just thought, oh, she's happy that she's getting rid of the child.
How callous.
Yeah. And well, that callousness kind of comes through with, the love triangle. Where
I meant
like,
she thought that the mother to be was callous, but
Oh,
yes, Liat has
sorry.
her struggles as well.
I interpreted it the other way. But yes, like they both kind of had a callousness. And it very much, because, I think we're meant to dislike Liat for everything that she does. Because, I mean, we get her as the young lover at the beginning of the story. And we're like, oh, yay, she's like, she's punching below her weight class with Itani because he's just a laborer. But, whatever. And so we're like, oh, she seems to be a decent person. She's in it for the love. And then we kind of get that whole reveal across the entire story where it's just, oh, you're just a young kid who doesn't really understand what you're doing or the impact of the choices you are making.
Yeah. In defense of Liat a little bit, I think she's not wrong about Ota withdrawing.
100%.
She's not wrong, actually. She's actually very perceptive, and she senses that he's become a bit more remote, and he's conflicted. This is what he does so well. Okay, so Ota wants to love her, and he wants to be a good lover and treat her well, but there's a piece of him, a big piece of him, that is done already, and he wants to go out into the world, and he has other things that are calling him, and he is tempted to go become a trader or whatever it is that he's been offered. He's got other options out there, so he's figuring himself out, and she senses that he's got one foot out the door, and she's not wrong. So I think that leaves her feeling very isolated and alone. And so what she does with Mati is, yes, okay, I'm not saying it's great, but I think you can understand under those circumstances, she's feeling abandoned, right? And so it's not like I felt at any point that she was a horrible person, right? I think there's a complex exploration of a personality here that we're meant to, I think, to some degree sympathize with. And I did. I felt sympathy for her more than I felt, oh, you terrible loose woman, you, or whatever.
Yeah.
So
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I agree. Like like she was annoying because, again, she acts like my teenagers, but no less annoying than Mati. Like, Mati, grow up. But like part of it is like, I think Ota would have been fine, but Mati showing up and pulling Ota back into this world of Ondats and poets and his birthright as the son of a Kai, like he tried to run from it, and here it is. And Ota has this really powerful sense of responsibility where he can't leave it alone. Like he just feels so responsible for everyone around him, and sometimes it's overwhelming. And and that's part of the reason I think that why he withdraws. It's too much. Like, it is too much. And because Ota is taking it in on himself. He's going to bear the burden, and he's going to, he's pushing everyone else away so that he can deal with it. I mean, this is in some ways, I think he kind of feels like this is his just desserts. This is his fate. Like, he fled, he tried to run from it by leaving the Dai Kavo, and now it's caught up to him, and he's like, all right, well, I mean, I guess I'll be the one to do it. And so I think that's another reason that he has to push Liat away. It's like, this was from a different life that I thought I could live. I clearly can't. So sorry, people are going to hunt me. Like, if they find out who they are, people are going to hunt me. And, I don't want this life for you. So I think part of it, Ota is trying to look out for her in addition to figuring himself out and seeing all this other stuff.
Definitely. And there's a part of him, as he admits in the book, that has never fully trusted her with that information.
Yeah.
There's some barrier there. And now that it's all catching up to him, even though he does disclose that to her, which is probably the point in the book where I disliked her the most, because once she finds out that he's from nobility, and she's like, oh yes, like how high can I rise in this society? That is the one time, because like Philip, I felt a lot of empathy for Liat throughout the story, because of her isolation, both professionally and personally. That all comes together at once, where she is suddenly burdened with such responsibility that she was not prepared for. But at that point where Ota does confess to her his background, and in her mind she's kind of scheming about how she can rise to the upper echelons, I'm like, I don't really like that.
What about you, Nico?
I think it's yeah, the same time, yeah. One of the strengths was that the characters were so complex and felt so real. And like there were a lot of stories that have quote unquote complex characters, but it was kind of taken to a whole new level here. Because like we've all discussed, there's like you can within the same character, you can feel at the same time like, oh, you're being pretty crappy. Oh, I completely understand where you're coming from. Oh, this is annoying, but it's realistic. And that was kind of with all the characters, no matter who they were or what they did, you weren't getting just one view of like, are you right and wrong? There was no black and white in this book whatsoever. Everything is shades of gray. And like even with the whole plot by Seedless, even Seedless really early on offers up this whole explanation about how he's a slave and he's being forced to do these things, and offers why he should be set free. It's like you get all the different sides, and everybody sees the events a little bit different. The way that, Wilson sees it as like, oh, it's sad, but it's necessary. And Amat, who's like, this is just too far. I have to do this. And then you have Oda, who's like, no, yeah, we got to kill him now because that's the only way to go. And it's like everybody has these really different viewpoints. And yet normally a love triangle too is super annoying, but the way it was handled, I thought actually made a lot of sense. It was, our two starting characters had already kind of started to drift, as had been shown. And then for Mati, for his character, who's very young and naive, and even though he's like 16, he is much more naive than a normal 16-year-old would be. He's lived, isolated his whole life. And so he's like, oh my gosh, this cute girl's paying attention to me and actually wants to be my friend. And like, that's all he needed. And so his behavior makes sense. And, Leah's kind of like, I'm, sad because Oda's gone. So like, I could see why it happened. Still not my favorite thing, but with all the characters, yeah, just the kind of complete view of all sides I found really, really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that Nico just said that set off a light bulb for me there was the relationship between Mati and Seedless. I thought it was really interesting because Seedless is creepy. Okay. He's super creepy, but he starts out this relationship by fooling Mati and messing with him. But there's a serious point beneath that as well, which is that he is in a sense a slave, and that this created for me, I didn't feel always creeped out by Seedless. Sometimes I felt sorry for him, and I felt a sense of connection with him. And he has a point, doesn't he? He actually has a point, that this whole system that this society is built on is exploitative, and it's messed up. So the fact that Seedless is in a way, he's behaving in an extremely destructive manner, and he's hurting characters like Madge, innocent, and other characters that we care about. But he has a point, a very compelling one, and that this whole thing it involves a lot of pain and suffering, and not least for him, and it's literalized when he's put in that box as well, right? That sense of him being a slave, being a prisoner, and he just wants to end it. He wants to end it, and I felt for him, Yeah.
And Philip, that I just remembered a scene from this book. I gotta look at my notes again. Like that relationship between Mati and Seedless. Seedless is, also looking for connection in the scene where Ota's busy about to kill Heshai, and he's talking to Mati, and Mati's like, what have you done, Seedless? And Seedless is like, what's the difference between us, labor and Endot, that you'll brush aside Ota's sins and not mine? And Mati smiles and says, but you aren't him. And Seedless is like, and you love him. And Mati takes a pose of affirmation. And Seedless says, and love is more important than justice. And then Mati's like, sometimes, yes. And Seedless smiled and nodded. What a terrible thought, he said, that love and injustice should be married. And it isn't different. Like Ota he forgives Ota for things that he wouldn't forgive other people for, because he loves Ota. Like he looks up to Ota. Like he does love Ota. And how relevant is that to our lives, that we will forgive people close to us things that we will not forgive people who are not close to us.
Yeah.
And then the end of that scene where Seedless just stops and says, he just breaks off and just looks triumphant. And Mati's like, what's going on? And Seedless says, he's forgiven you. And because Ota has strangled Heshai for Mati, like in order to stop this disaster.
Yeah.
It's just so powerful. Like these, and it's just very different from what you see in normal fantasy books. The complexity of these relationships.
Yep.
So good.
Nothing feels contrived. And I think this goes back to Nico's point about the love triangle. The reason I think so many of us hate love triangles is because it is the fabrication of drama. They are trying to pull at you. They're trying to pull some emotion out of you by putting characters into situations that spark that kind of angst. But in this story, we just genuinely see relationships falling apart and coming together in various ways that feels very true to life. It is not forced drama, which is the irritating part.
Yeah.
Well, to me, it feels very realistic with the love triangle, mainly because they are so young that they make these juvenile mistakes that are going to ripple throughout their entire lives. I can only assume that eventually, like, Ota and Mati are not going to be. They're going to be like, your best friends, your frenemy. They're going to be frenemies, is where I'm assuming the series is going to go because of everything.
I think that's exactly how Abraham would describe it.
Yeah, is going to be set up in the first book, mainly because, they're young, and relationships and love, like, that there's infatuation and lust. Like those are young feelings. And then like love is work. And so like, as Ota is away trying to figure himself out, she's like, well, he's already got one foot out the door, to go off of what Philip said. And she's not willing to kind of put in that work. And so she gravitates to Mati because he's there. He's available. And it shows, like, what young people are willing to do just to kind of look out for themselves. And, it's very, very complex. It's very, very real life. Because I'm sure all of us have been in situations or known people in situations whose relationship fell apart because both parties involved weren't willing to put in the work. And, that's one of the things that I live my life by is, my relationship gets all of my work. Like everything else is secondary. And I don't think that they were ready for that, but they were like, they were acting like they were ready for it, because, they were sneaking away together and they were doing all this stuff. And, oh, you're going to get in trouble with your boss. You're worth it and stuff like that. And it's a very, very interesting dynamic that I think is going to, like Alan said, ripple throughout the entirety of their lives.
I wonder, I feel like the relationship part, I would expect them to have forgiveness for that. I think the actions of Ota at the end of the book, being a part of that murder and ending somebody's life and feeling like he has a responsibility to do that, I think that will be more of the wedge between him and Mati than the relationship between Liat and Mati. I don't know. To me, Ota has already moved on from Liat. I don't know if that's true or not. There was that separation, but I feel like that's something that he could look on and see as a relationship of his youth and could probably forgive that betrayal more easily than the complex jumble of feelings that's going to come up when he has to
murder of a master.
Exactly.
I could see that as well.
Even with like the whole thing where he had already kind of started to move on and realized he probably wasn't going to be with Liat, but like still kind of hurt finding out that like her and him were doing that while he was gone. And just kind of, I felt like that was really realistic too, because I kept thinking it was going to be one of those things where he's like, my friends, it's all right. I've moved on. You be happy. But like, that wouldn't have been nearly as realistic. Yeah. And so for him to be like, what, like, I don't hate you, but like this is a betrayal. And, it made a lot more sense. And so it definitely, I thought, worked. But that's what just all of the relationships are complex. And going back to when we were talking about kind of the Andot as well, there's also there's also definitely the idea of too, like, well, is it anything that an Andot does wrong is that the poet's fault, because they're the ones who are binding them and are supposed to be controlling them to an extent. And I think too that Heshai kind of wanted Seedless to succeed in getting him killed in a lot of ways too,
Yeah.
because
Towards
Yeah.
the
that was
end,
the whole
it was
aspect of the
it was
self-hatred.
kind of, yeah.
And
It's
so he's like,
interesting,
you go
yeah.
do you.
Yeah,
Because like he was like, you should probably lock this door, and he was like, we'll see.
I agree, Nico. I think that a part of Heshai wanted all this to end, and that Seedless being that aspect of himself that made it happen. And let's not forget why Ota. I mean, imagine being in the place where Ota was, where it's an act of compassion to murder someone, right? Because Ota is doing this because Seedless has convinced him a lot of people are going to die otherwise, that this Andot is going to be weaponized and is going to be used on a lot of innocent people. So he's had to make a very, very difficult calculation here, a life-changing moment here for him. And of course, for Madge, it's very personal, right? It's a very personal act in killing Heshai, because for her, it's all about the anger and the loss of her baby. And so, but for Ota, it is definitely an act of compassion. And so it's an interesting exploration of compassion here. That's the thing we haven't talked about too much yet, is how Abraham explores what does it mean to be compassionate. And sometimes are you hurting one person by being compassionate to others? And this is literally he's been called upon to commit murder as an act of compassion. So yeah.
So I do want
Alan,
to
you're
say the
Alan,
one
you're
thing.
Alan, you're muted.
Oh, I'll let Alan get his
If you
thought.
want to know more about the theme of compassion, be sure you check out the novels of the Malazan Empire.
Oh yeah.
Which is Philip's plug. No, I completely agree. And what I wanted to highlight is, first of all, one, this is the first time I've ever been part of a collab where everyone else is making predictions and I get to listen. Usually it's reversed. But the relationship between the love triangle, the reason it doesn't bother me is because, like Sarah says, it's so well done. You would never see this handled the way it is. Like, I've never seen it in another fantasy book, in the fact that when Ota finds out and confronts Mati, she's a wonderful woman, Ota said carefully, sometimes maybe a little difficult to trust, but still a good woman. Mati nodded. Perhaps I should go, Ota said softly. I'm so sorry, Mata whispered to the fire. Otakvo, I'm so very, very sorry. You didn't do anything that hasn't been done 1,000 times before by 1,000 different people. But I did it to you. I betrayed you. You love her, but I don't trust her, Ota said softly. Or me, not any longer, Mati said. Or you, Ota agreed. That is not how those scenes go. Like that, we are not, as fantasy readers, as fiction readers, that is not how those scenes are supposed to go. Not that filled with complex feelings and understanding, but also because when Ota leaves, the pain in his chest was real and the rage behind it. And also, strangely, an amusement and a sense of relief. And just in that half of a page, Abraham has so quietly done so very much, like much more than if it was an explosive confrontation. And Abraham is so good at these quiet, rich moments that are just so, deep in characterization and feeling. And I just loved it so much. As y'all are talking, I'm just remembering these and I'm trying to find the quotes and stuff. So good.
Well, one of the last sections, I think we pretty much covered the entire book except Amat and the House of Ill Repute.
Yeah, she takes over the whorehouse. There are exactly as many tea houses in Japan as are in this book. There are tea houses everywhere.
But it was super interesting to see her because she seeks refuge and she runs away because people are after her and Marchant's just like, hey, you need to go away. And so she's like, well, I'm not going to just go sit on my hands and be bored, because she tried that sitting in her former lover's attic. And that just wasn't doing it for her. She's like, I'm too old for this nonsense. And so she goes and tries to find a job. where she then meets, I'm going to get this guy's name wrong, Ovinit.
Yeah.
Ovinit. And he just starts beating on her. And he's like, find my answers. And I thought how she very coldly kind of sits down, sabotages him, and then goes and finds help. And once the sad trade is done, replaces him.
Oh, Amat's tough as nails.
Oh, like I'm sad because I don't think she's going to be in the other books. Because she's older, or if she is, she doesn't make it past the second book.
If there's a 15-year gap between each book,
yeah.
Well, but it could be her impact living long. You don't know, but yeah, that whole plot line, I was worried. I'm like, oh no, are we going to go down this cliche route? Because usually in that sort of situation, maybe not exactly the same, but I'm like, oh, we have strong female characters, got to be broken down now. And so seeing her completely control the situation and then manipulate it to put her on top of, like, okay, I enjoyed that way more than I thought I was going to enjoy that plot line. I was kind of dreading it at first because I thought it was just going to go a very different route. So I was really pleased with how it was done.
Yeah, Amat gets the MVP. You know, she's
so cool.
I admired her tenacity and her ability to be patient, and she's not somebody you want to mess with. That's for sure. So yeah, no, it was a great thread in here, and again, just the complexity of it all, and her inner conflict as well, because she's going to hurt people that she cares about in the process of defending her city. And she's, she dumps Liat in a sense too, leaves her on her own. So that's not nice, and so, I mean, she there's damage done, there's collateral damage as a result of her taking on this mission, but boy, she does not look back, so.
No. She's tough as nails. I love Amat.
She is, and she's very future focused. She has to ignore the personal difficulties. Like she comments several times on the children, for example, that are part of this brothel that she is now running, and knows that she has to overlook these small, horrific facts of life in order to look toward the future where she can ensure that there is a country for all children to grow up in. And it's heartbreaking. I found that part really sad, where she goes back and she has to reconcile the fact that these women who took care of her when she was at her lowest, she now has to go back and keep them on this path. Now, obviously, she does her best to make life a little better for them while she is there, but it's not as if she can release them from that immediately. She's looking toward the future. I always love it when characters rise up because of their cunning rather than their brute strength.
Yeah. When I finished this book, some questions that I had was like Ota does this for Mati, kills Heshai, but Seedless is gone. What, like, he does this for Mati, and so that the Galts aren't discovered, but you're collapsing the economy of an entire city. Like, what are you doing to everyone here? And also, like, I was like, well, Mati's going to be in trouble. He went over there to take over Seedless. Like, I'm certain the Daikavo is going to be thrilled with that. So I was just like, what is going to happen with all of these things? So,
then Amat just kind of steps in, and she goes up to Marchant, and she's like, listen, you're leaving anyway. You're going to sell me these buildings or rent these buildings to me, pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
And he's like, why would I do that? And he's like, she's like, I'm going to keep this economy going. We're going to go back to the way it was before.
And he's terrified of being found out. He'll be strung up. He'll be executed instantly. Like, he's got to get gone.
So that does bring up something
sorry.
I was. Oh, sorry, I didn't even really realize you were going. The one thing that kind of annoyed me was the one thing I just couldn't get past. And so I was curious as to what your guys' thoughts were, is why does nobody just try to kill the poets anyway and assassinate them quietly? Because especially with Heshai, like, he was the easiest guy to assassinate possibly ever.
Yeah.
He regularly went into an area in an alley and drank himself into a stupor. And even we saw him get assassinated, but I'm like, why not do this? And I get the whole idea that, because if they're found out, there's going to be this huge war and there could be retaliation. But it's like, it's extremely difficult to recapture an andot once it's gone and the poet's dead and a new one has to. So I just kept thinking, I'm like, why aren't people not trying to actually,
The answer-
just assassinate?
The key here is they do try to assassinate him, but they try to make it look like they're not assassinating him to avoid exactly what you said. So if it were an obvious assassination and they were to blame the Galt, then boom, there would be war. They would annihilate a whole generation of Galt people. So they're trying to make it look like it's not an assassination with this slightly more cloak and dagger approach to getting at him. So.
And the problem is that first of all, no one in the Kayate is going to assassinate an Andot. That's all their livelihood. The second, if you kill Heshai, Seedless is gone, but every other city in the Kayate has an Andot. So yes, you've collapsed Seedless, and yeah, it will suck to try to get Seedless back, but all the other Andot are going to be turned on you. So if it is even like, it's obvious if a poet is assassinated, it's obvious that it was someone from the outside, and they're just gonna, who knows who they're gonna turn it against. And so they are afraid of being nuked. They're just afraid of being nuked.
It needs to be an Order 66 if it's anything. You can't take one. You need to take them all.
Correct.
To cover what Sarah and Nico said, an Order 66, this is not a society in which a coordinated strike like an Order 66 is feasible. And so you can't just instantaneously knock them all out. There's going to be some delay where they could possibly get a pocket of Andot protected and their poets kind of set aside and protected, and then it's just the nuclear option.
Yeah, that's the problem.
And that's why Ota goes and gets Maj at the end, is because she goes missing. It is assumed that the mother sought revenge against the poet for the unlawful slaying or unwanted, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Of her child. And so it's basically she is a cover for what's going on.
For what's happening.
And that's why he then takes her with him.
And I think what Seedless was also hoping for, what worked really well with his plan, is that not only was he plotting to take down Heshai, he also was preventing him from passing any knowledge along to Mati. So he was trying to break that line of succession, because that's why Mati was there, to learn to either take him over or know how to call down an Andot in the future. And so he was kind of accomplishing his goal of driving Heshai to the point of breaking, but also ensuring that none of his knowledge gets passed along.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I assumed it was going to be explored more. I just couldn't get it out of my head because Heshai just seems so easy to assassinate and make look like an accident. And that was really why I'm just like, come on, like you could have figured something out. But
knife him in the dark when he's staggering to a bar.
I mean, like there's a lot of, I'm like, oh, it was just a mugger. They didn't realize, but there's still a lot of things that haven't been fully explained, which is like, what all other Andot exist right now. What powers do they have? And like, what's the range? Because I was really curious with Seedless. What's the range? Like, does he have to travel to another country to wreak havoc, or can he just do it from, so there's so many questions still. That's why, like, it wasn't like, oh, this is a black mark on this book. It was just, that was my one, like, I'm good with everything else. That one I really want to know more on, because it seemed like it could have been different. But
the best thing
I'm excited to find more.
This is the weakest book. This is the weakest of the four. It's Andrew. I gave this when I first read it, I gave it 3.5 stars. But as soon as I finished the series, I said 5 stars. Same thing with 2, 5 stars, because of everything that it's laying the groundwork for. It all works together.
Remember, Alan, the stars belong in the sky.
You know what? I've actually changed it, Philip. I'm doing a 47-star scale where I'm giving I'm doubling down. I'm gonna give stars even harder now, because
so, Alan, we're gonna have to call you the 47-star strumpet then.
Open 24 hours a day. 4 stars right here.
Well, as we're starting to wrap up, let's just kind of do a wish list where Alan can sit back and giggle maniacally because he knows what's going on.
Just gonna straight face. My students hate it when I review their papers and just do this, just flat face, like they want me to react somehow. Just
Philip, Sarah, and Nico, do you have any wants and or theories on where we're going here?
I don't really have any, to be honest with you. The fact that that I think Abraham is really good at surprising people, and so I'm very hesitant to make predictions because I know I'm going to look bad uh, when I'm wrong, which is
You got to
probably
keep your credibility up
I
on
got to
book 2.
try somehow or other here. So I don't have a lot to say about where I think this is going, except that I'm really looking forward to the next book. So yeah, I mean, I expect eventually a much more open conflict between Galt and the city-states of Kayem. That's as far as I'm going to go. But so I'm interested to see how that pans out because there are still Ondot around. So yeah, but we'll see. Yeah, that's all I'm going to predict. In terms of the individual characters, the relationships, all that, I have no idea what's going to happen. But yeah, we'll see.
I do imagine Oda is going to have to make like some really important choices later on. I'm wondering. I'll be interested to see if Mati does end up trying to take over Nandot after all. And with dude, there's like so many things that just didn't happen the way you would have thought already. Kind of like Philip said, it's really hard to make predictions because Abraham did a better job about making me not see things coming that seem really obvious in the back, like after the fact, than most authors do. It's just a lot of things. And part of it, I think, is just because you expect the normal thing to happen. And in a lot of cases, the more realistic thing for the characters happens, but it's just not what you're used to seeing.
100%.
Kind of like Alan brought up with the whole situation with the triangle earlier. It's just like, like the end with like Mati, like, a normal fantasy book. It's like, it is my duty. I must do it. I'll do it anyway. And this one, he's like, no, you're right. Like, I'm terrified and I really don't want to do this. And I probably didn't need that much to talk me out of it, but
yeah.
Yeah, I think I will also refrain from predictions. I am interested. I want to see how what Ota did at the end of this book impacts him in the future. I'm really looking forward to following characters over a lifetime as opposed to a short span of years. That's something I'm really enjoying about the Dresden Files right now because we see Harry age through the series, which I really like. So I'm interested to see how Daniel Abraham does it because he's definitely a much more character-focused author than Jim Butcher is. And I'm very interested because as soon as I finished this book, I thought back to watching Alan's video about his favorite fantasy characters, and I was like, I am absolutely sure that when I watched that, Alan had Mati higher than Ota, and this is not computing to me. So I actually went back and rewatched it. I was like, Alan, you do have Mati higher than Ota. Like, what is this? And so I'm excited to see why that happens. There was a little bit of explanation in the video, but I had thought that was the case, and it was. So I'm intrigued to see.
I love both of them. But the story over the lifetime is so Abraham handles this long period of time so incredibly well. I've just never read anything like this series, and I'm super excited to see where you guys land on each book. Like I can't wait for these every month just to hear what you guys think. Oh man, book two has some, like, they just have some awesome quotes and awesome relationship moments, and so good. I'm ready for book 2. I'm ready for y'all to talk about book 2.
Yeah, well, speaking of book 2, the next live show, which we should be reading book 2 this month.
Word.
The next live show, I believe the plan is the next one is on Nico's channel. And then we will decide between Sarah and Philip. And I'm trying to see if Zara wants to join us as well.
Yay.
Because I've always wanted to.
She just finished Winter yesterday.
Yeah. I've always wanted to be in a live show with Zara. So we may be adding another person to the mix in the next video. But the next video, for people who are watching this in the future, will be in the description box down below. I'll just kind of update it so it's just this ongoing thing of people who have 6 hours to waste can just follow us along the journey. I also have everybody's channel in the description box down below. So if you aren't subscribed to everybody, you should be subscribed to everybody. And yeah, that's pretty much the plug there. And we have covered a lot of ground in this book. I don't know if we've got a whole lot more to say. Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't?
Just want to thank you, Andrew, for being
Yes,
a great
thank you.
host. And thank you to the other three of you for being awesome people. And it's a pleasure to talk about books with you guys.
Always,
Absolutely. I have been wanting to get on camera with you, Philip, for months. And so this is like the
Philip's
dream
best
come
thing.
true.
He gives us legitimacy. It's the,
Yeah.
he's
I
the
feel like
higher
this
academic.
is a really great group. So
I've been on camera with Sarah. I've been on camera with Nico. I've been in Jeopardy with Alan.
We get college credit for this discussion with Philip. So,
Oh, do we?
yeah.
Well, guys, it's been an absolute delight and a fantastic discussion. I'm going to go ahead and end the live show. So thank you all for joining. You've all been fantastic, and I can't wait to continue the read along. So till next time, guys. Peace out.
Close of farewell.
Bye.